And this is the Q&A podcast, and I'm your host, Peter Slen. Thanks for joining us. Starting shortly is our conversation with Gary Walters. He's the former Chief Usher of the White House. He's written a memoir about his years serving the first families. Our conversation begins shortly. I do what I am told to do is how Gary Walters described his job at the White House. He served as Chief Usher longer than anyone in history, from 1986 to 2007. In that role, he worked with presidents and first ladies from Reagan to George W. Bush on White House renovations, state dinners, and major political events. Mr. Walters began working in the White House as a Secret Service agent in 1970 when Richard Nixon was president. A nonpartisan position, the Chief Usher oversees the White House staff and manages the executive mansion. His book is titled White House Memories. Our conversation with Gary Walters begins now. So, Gary Walters, we are in an exact replica of the Oval Office. In your career, how much time did you spend in the real Oval Office?
Only when the president requested our activities. Certainly, each time the president held a press conference or had the press in, we would come in and adjust the furniture and make sure that everything was correct. And because it was all part of the White House property, they're antiques. And we wanted to make sure that they were handled properly. So we always had a staff there. The president was setting up for addresses to the nation from behind the desk of the Oval Office. Our staff was there, the electricians, our operations crew to move things around. So we were always present, but once it was set up and done, we were out. So I didn't spend much time in the Oval Office itself.
But as former Chief Usher, did you conduct business with the president in this room?
No, usually when I was conducting business with him, I didn't do policy. So what I did was dealing with them was in their residence. Or I found myself each day at the elevator landing when the president came or the first lady came down from the second floor in the morning or in the afternoon as they were going, I was always there. Principally to receive any information that they wanted to present to me, or if I had some information like, Mr. President, your house guests just arrived and they're in the Lincoln bedroom or whatever. So it was an opportunity, and probably I was the only person who interacted directly with the president and the first lady almost on a daily basis. President's staff gets to interact with him. Mrs. President's wife, her staff interacts with her. But very seldom do those people get to interact with both the president and the first lady.
In your book, White House Memories, Reflections of the Longest-Serving Chief Usher, you have several pictures of you walking the colonnade with the president. What was being talked about at that point?
Whatever the president wanted to talk about. Sometimes we were talking about baseball with President George W. Bush. We would talk about the grounds, the activities that might be coming up, any house guests that they had coming with the first ladies, usually going the other way. We would talk about the meals that were being served and various things. But with the presidents, it was pretty much just a conversation on anything that was on their minds or that they were considering, but never policy. I served the presidency, Republican, Democratic, it didn't matter. My responsibility and the responsibility of the resident staff was to see that the President of the United States and the First Lady were at their maximum level that we could provide for them, give them some relief from the daily chores that we all do. Who's going to fix dinner? What are we going to have? My sink faucet is leaking. And so it's those kinds of things that we talked about in general. But it was really what the president wanted to discuss when we took those walks. I also made those same walks with George Herbert Walker Bush, and he usually liked to walk around the South grounds in the morning early, going to the Oval Office, not down the colonnade. So sometimes there were longer discussions, and most of the time it had to do with grandchildren or just whatever topic the president had on mind and could get away for a little while from policy.
You have a quote in your book from J.B. West. I think that Chief Usher J.B. West, who served the presidency from 1941 to 1961, gave the most succinct answer as to what a Chief Usher does. I do what I am told to do. His answer is still appropriate today, and I use it myself.
That's correct.
What did that include?
Everything that the President and the First Lady wanted in their home. That's the one thing that I was trying to convey in the book, is that the White House is not just a political entity. It's the home of our presidents. Every president lived there with the exception of George Washington. He selected the site for the house. He supervised the early construction of the house, but unfortunately he passed away and couldn't live in the house before it was finished. But it's really whatever the President and the First Lady want done. The house is theirs for 4 or 8 years. It's their home. They can change it around the way they want to, use furniture of their own choosing. We have a large stock of furniture in our support facility that's run by the National Park Service. The presidents and first ladies can choose those items. It really is, what do you want done, sir? I'll be glad to get it fixed for you or get it taken care of.
Gary Walters, was there such a thing as a typical day? What time did your day start? What time did it end? And how did you know it was over?
Well, the last part of your question is the easiest one to ask. I never knew when it was over, which was much to the chagrin of my wife, who had cooked a meal and was prepared to serve it at a certain time. And I never knew when I was coming home because of the President and the First Lady's schedule and because of the activity level at the White House. But I usually got there in the morning, sometime between 6 and 6:15. I met with all my department heads. There are 90 people on the executive residence staff, florists, calligraphers, plumbers, carpenters, the chefs,
housekeepers,
the housekeepers, and the food service staff, our storeroom people. So they're all part of it. So each one of them each morning would come in to the office, the usher's office on the first floor, and I would check with them and give them a rundown of what I saw the day, if anything had occurred overnight that changed what we were planning to do, and anything that may have come up in the previous day that I could add to their information base so they could prepare for things that were coming up in the future.
Because of your position, what kind of background check did you have to go through?
Not only me, but everybody in the executive residence. The Secret Service forms a cordon around the president, wherever he is, First Lady also. But in the private quarters, there's a door at the elevator that's closed. The Secret Service stands by the elevator outside of that door. The executive residence staff is on the inside of that door. The president brings home top secret papers, briefing books. He puts them on his desk at night, reading material. And we are there. So we go through, and you get many people to say it, but we go through a pretty extensive background investigation. And I will say I'm tremendously pleased at the professionalism of the executive residence staff. You don't see tell-all books coming out of the executive residence staff.
Is the chief usher a political position?
No, at least it wasn't while I was there. What the future holds, I don't know. But I served both Democrats and Republicans. I started in the usher's office in 1976 when Rex Scouten, who was the chief usher, who hired me in the usher's office, retired in '86. He recommended me to be the next chief usher to the President and Mrs. Reagan, and the President appointed me as the chief usher. And
that is solely an appointment by the President, correct?
That's correct. The residence staff actually serves at the pleasure of the President. They do not have civil service protection. The President can dismiss anybody. It's just like being if you had a cleaning service in your home and the people that they sent you didn't like. Don't bring them back. I don't want them here. Same thing in the residence. The most important thing is the privacy and the comfort. It is their home for 4 or 8 years, and they need to be comfortable in their home and with the people around them, especially since, like I said, we were behind the closed doors, that the Secret Service stopped outside, we were inside, and we interacted directly with the family. And the family got to know the staff well, very well, and trusted them with quite a few, obviously, private things. And it takes about anywhere from 2 to 6 months after an inaugural new president moves in, before they have complete confidence that this staff, who had been the staff of a previous president, were going to become their staff. And we all know when that happens, because they walk in, when you walk into the room where they are and they're having a conversation doesn't cease, it continues. So at that point, everybody breathes a little bit of a sigh of relief. We've gotten past that first hurdle, which is trust. And that's tremendously important to the resident staff, to have the trust of the first family. And they know that they can be comfortable in their home.
You write in your book about the transition from George H.W. Bush to Bill Clinton. It seemed to me that there was a preconceived notion that everyone working in the White House was not to be trusted, as we were Republican choices. Yet it was not unusual for an incoming family to wonder if the resident staff were more loyal to a previous family.
And that's exactly what I was talking about. It's building that trust in the first family. And of course, once again, we were behind that door that nobody sees. And the interaction was personal between the staff and the president and the first lady and their family and guests. And it was easier for us to build trust with them than it was the political staff to get used to us having that kind of access.
Now, Gary Walters, you started in the White House in 1970, joined the Usher's office in
76.
In 76. Well, before we go back to the Nixon administration, it's March 28th, 1976, your first duty officer day. President Ford calls. Where were you? What did he want?
I had switched over to the Usher's office a couple of months before that and was being in training. I was there at different times so that I could get familiar with the family and their activities, and also how the White House actually operated. I did it from afar for the first 5 years I was there. And my first full duty day was a Sunday. I was sitting at my desk going over the papers of what was going to be going on that week, and the phone rang. And I picked up the phone, answered it like I normally did. Gary Walters, the Usher's office, may I help you? And came across Gary, and I didn't know what to do. It was the President of the United States calling me, and he was calling me by my first name. I went to stand up because I thought I didn't know what to do, but my legs hit the desk, so I couldn't do that. And he said, Gary, I have a problem with my shower. I don't have any hot water. Of course, immediately my mind, the President of the United States doesn't have any hot water. He said, yeah, it's been a couple of days, and I've just been forgetting to tell people about it. So he said, could you make a note and have them come in tomorrow and take a look at it? And I said, well, sir, we have staff here that can take a look at it. Oh, don't worry about that. I've been using Betty's shower. And just do it on. And I said, well, I know, sir, you're going out to play a round of golf in a couple of hours. Why don't I have the staff come up and look at it? And so that kind of ended that conversation. And then I took a deep breath. My first direct interaction with the president to do something for him that he wanted done, and also to pretty heady thing to have the President of the United States call you by your first name.
Did the shower get fixed?
The shower did get fixed. I had luckily the people that were on duty that day were the operating engineers and two of the oldest fellows that have been there the longest. And the operating engineers are the ones that take care of the HVAC, the heating, air conditioning, and ventilation system in the residence. And they were also magnificent technicians. So I called them and said, you know, President's going out at such time. Meet me upstairs. I'll make sure that Mrs. Ford is aware that we're going to come. And so at the appropriate time, we met upstairs and went into the president's shower. And they came in, the two gentlemen from there, and all they had was a satchel. And I said, well, aren't you going to need some more tools? He said, not a problem. We'll take care of it. He walked over and grabbed a towel off the towel rack, wrapped it around the mixing valve in the shower, and took out a mallet and banged it. And he said, that ought to do it. I said, really? When we turned on the water, sure enough, in about 15 seconds, hot water came out. And I said,
God bless the
is this
70s.
something that happens all the time? He said, well, it happens frequently. These pipes were put in the 1948 to 52 renovation of the house, and they're pretty old now. And sometimes the calcium builds up in the mixing valve where the water, cold, hot. And they said, we just break it up by giving it a wrap. He said, that'll be good for another few weeks. I said, well, aren't you going to do something more than that? And he said, no, we'd have to tear out the whole wall and replace the whole system. So we just, from time to time, the maids tell us when there's a problem, and we go in and use our mallet and fix it.
Where is the usher's office located in the White? Is it in the executive residence in the main White House?
And the north portico doors open onto the grand foyer, the grand staircase that goes up to the second floor that we've seen the president and heads of state walk down for state dinners. The usher's office, when you walk in that north door, is immediately on the right-hand side. In fact, when you look at the nightly shot that the media has that looks to the north portico, the first window on the first floor that always has a light on, that's the usher's office.
If a first lady or president called from the residence, which is up one flight, correct?
Mm-hmm. Correct.
How quickly could you be there if they needed something?
Momentarily. You
Would
go
you go up the
outside of
stairs?
go outside of the usher's office, and that's a staircase that goes from the third floor level down to the lowest basement level. And I frequently was exercise was running up those stairs to go take papers to the president, answer a question, deliver something that came in for them. And I also used that to get down one level for when the president and first lady were coming and going.
Gary Walters, you were chief usher for 21 years?
Yes, sir.
Rex Scouten was chief usher for a long time prior. J.B. West, the same thing. But the permanent staff, the carpenters, the housekeepers, the florists, et cetera, some of them 30, 40 years?
Yes. When the White House once again was rebuilt and President Truman lived across the street in Blair House, 48 to 52. Well, when the house reopened in 52, the staff, part of which was at Blair House, came back and enlarged, obviously, because you had a larger facility, the White House. So it's 52. Well, some of the people that came there were in their 30s, and most of the resident staff stays their entire career. Probably 95%. Once, if they start there, they stay there for their entire career. Well, about every 30 years, you have a changeover. So 52, 82, and so forth. So the staff is there. They're magnificent professionals who make the chief usher's job that much easier because we know we can give them an assignment and they'll carry it out to the best of their ability, and their abilities are very high.
Is there an usher on site anytime the president is in residence, and that includes overnight?
Not overnight. The usher's office, or the assistant usher, is in the office from before the president gets up in the morning. So that means we have to guess when that is and be there early. And then we do a switch over about 2:30 in the afternoon, and that usher is on duty, or assistant usher is on duty until the president and the first lady notify them that they're retiring for the night. And we had a little system with the phones that they could give us a couple buzzes, and we know that that's the end of the evening. The only staff that they're resident staff that's there on a 24-hour basis are the operating engineers, the people that were taking care of the HVAC system, and they were there to make sure that the house was in good fiddle overnight and 24 hours a day. So they were the only staff members that were there, except, of course, if the president and the first lady had their own staff, a couple of people, their own staff, a maid or a valet. The Nixons had Manoel and Fina Sanchez, who'd been longtime employees of theirs, and when they came to the White House, they were put on the resident staff. Then Clintons brought a young woman from Georgia with them, and we added her to
Carters.
the staff. I mean the Carters, I'm sorry.
Right.
And so we accommodate those, and of course they're there 24 hours a day, but they have assigned responsibilities in the house, just like the rest of the resident staff.
How do you keep the books What are personal expenses? What are government expenses? What are political expenses? And how do you keep the books?
Meticulously. Luckily, there was a wonderful group of people that made sure that the President and the First Lady's expenses were accounted for completely. The chefs had to write down, if we get in a crate of eggs into the storeroom, if 2 of the eggs were taken out and were on the President's breakfast plate, 2 of those eggs were accounted for.
That's a personal expense.
It's a personal expense. The President and the First Lady, their family members, their guests, the President pays for their private expenses in the executive residence. Dry cleaning, sundries, food, beverage.
But not lodging.
Not lodging.
It's like a personal home.
There's a congressional appropriation that provides for the care and maintenance of the house, and that's where the resident staff is. We're part of that appropriation, and but they do have, and we were meticulous about keeping that because it is the coming out of the President's pocket, and also you said about political events. Any event that was deemed political by the social office, social secretary, because there were political entities there. The political parties were responsible for paying for those events. And we had the same meticulous care in making sure, once again, that same crate of eggs. If 2 were gone and we used the other 10 to help make that reception right, those 10 got appropriated to the political event. And those events, if we had to call in people from the outside, we called them service by agreement workers. They were contract workers, additional servers.
Like a caterer?
And luckily, being here in the Washington area, with the embassies and everything, there's quite a cadre of people. And of course, the Secret Service would have given them the same kind of background checks that they do for anybody that's coming into the White House. But take a state dinner in the state dining room. We could serve 130 people in there. I had 6 butlers and a maitre d'. And we had 2 people assigned to each table. Well, that's 26 people right there. So we had to supplement that. And that we referred to them as contract workers, service by agreement workers, where we bought a portion of their time for their activity. They weren't employees of the government, so there were no benefits or anything associated with that. They were contract employees and contract workers. Same thing in the florist shop when we needed additional people in the florist shop, serving in the kitchen, the same circumstance. But other than that, we took care of pretty much everything in-house.
Gary Walters, a state dinner that is paid for by the taxpayers, correct?
Through the State Department.
130, et cetera, guests.
Through the State Department.
Through the State Department
reimburses the executive residence for those, and that's why I say we keep meticulous track of those. And
throughout your career, did you ever have to testify on the budget and expenses in front of Congress?
I didn't. We always tried to keep the Chief Usher away from having to testify on Capitol Hill because, unfortunately, sometimes those questions go off track and they don't talk about the budget. They want to know about privacy issues. And the Chief Usher obviously has a lot of awareness of what those privacy issues are and things that should stay private to the President and the First Lady. But we kept meticulous track of those. And originally, the Park Service were the ones who testified because the White House is on reservation number 1 in the Park Service system. And they're responsible for the exterior of the building. They also run our warehouse of all the furnishings that are not used in the warehouse but are kept. So it's a support facility, and it's available to us. So there's a very close relationship between the Park Service and the executive residence.
Were first ladies or first families ever surprised when you sent them a bill every month for their expenses?
When Mrs. Reagan came into the White House, what had gone on before was every month when the bill was prepared, it was sent to the First Lady's personal secretary from previous administrations, and then they would either send it to the First Lady or the President, and they'd look over it and they'd prove it, and it'd get sent to their accountant, and the accountant would pay the bill, and that would be it. The first bill, the first month that when Mrs. Reagan was in office, I called her personal secretary and said, I have the monthly bill that's ready. And she said, what? I said, yeah, I have the monthly bill that's ready to go to the First Lady. I said, previously it had gone through your office and taken care of. And she said, I'll get back to you. About 30 minutes later, I received a call back from her, and she said, you need to make an appointment with Mrs. Reagan. She wants to talk to you about this. So I called upstairs and asked for the First Lady, and she answered the phone, and I said, is it appropriate for me to speak with you about the bill? I understand you want to talk to me about it. And she said, yes. Pretty clipped. And so I went upstairs and met her. I had my records with me and explained the circumstances and the history of the presidents having to pay for their own. And she said, well, I just wasn't expecting that. I wonder how many people know the president has to pay for his own meals. And I said, well, that's the circumstance. I never had another conversation with her about it. She accepted what we presented after my discussion with her and told her how we kept the records and the bills and showed her where we got things. She never asked again.
Well, I think it's fair to say that Mrs. Reagan had a reputation as a strong woman, but you write in your book that she was the easiest person that you ever worked for.
That's correct.
Why?
She was here. All of us have our good days and our bad days and up and down, and some are more difficult than others. But Mrs. Reagan was even keeled, right? We knew what she wanted. It wasn't any doubt about what she wanted. She wanted the very best for Ronnie and for her guests that came to the White House. And that was easy to do. You just did what was the best thing and what she wanted done. And as long as that was the case, I mean, it was just very comfortable dealing with that. And I'm a great admirer of Mrs. Reagan.
Well, I want to go back. You mentioned that the Park Service did any testifying in front of Congress that had to happen. But throughout your book, there are other offices that you had to work with for various renovations, et cetera, et cetera. The City of D.C., the Park Service, the White House Endowment Fund, the White House Preservation Fund, the White House Foundation, the Committee for the Preservation of the White House, the National Archives, the Curator's Office, the White House Historical Association, which is where we are now, the Carpenter's Office, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Military office.
Military office. How did that coordination go if you wanted to make a project, do something at the White House?
The basis was laid through history. I mean, it had been built up where the delineation of responsibilities was pretty much decided long before I got there. But the coordination effort that the Chief Usher had was to make sure that everybody wasn't surprised, like the First Lady was with the bill. It was something that was one of the primary responsibilities of the Chief Usher, was to involve all those entities, the press office, various things. In fact, in the Clinton administration early on, I had a discussion with Mrs. Clinton, and she said, is there a way we can relieve some of the stress on Bill from his jogging? He can't go out and jog around in Washington, the streets, the way he did in Arkansas. And the roadway here is kind of tough asphalt. And so I sat down with the National Park Service, and we developed a system where we came in and milled out about a 4-foot wide strip all the way around the quarter-mile circular drive in the South grounds. And we put in a rubberized chip, tires that they chip up and make very small pieces and put it with an epoxy and put that down, and it gave a running track for the president. Well, we did that on quietly, didn't need to be big news item or anything. And finally, when the press started looking at it, I got a call from the press office, and why in the world did you do this without telling us? I said, well, it was a request from the First Lady. She asked me directly, and I was able to do it. There was no cost to the government. It was done through the National Park Service and their foundation.
Private donations to that foundation.
And so I said, but I'll give you all the records. So at that point, I sent them all the records with all the information, and it went away quietly. It never became an issue. But so the coordination is really important to make sure that the surprises don't crop up, and that's the coordination. Spent a lot of time doing that in the years.
Throughout your 21 years as chief usher, pools, patios, tennis courts, horseshoe pits, putting greens, running tracks, a tree house, a ping pong table, little league games, all occurred at the White House.
And many other things. With presidents playing tennis, President W. Bush, 43 as we refer to him, I guess now, would go in the South grounds and with a tennis racket and a ball and hit the ball, and his dog would run and get the ball and bring it back to him, and they do that for hours. It gave them a little bit of recreation and allowed them to get out of the Oval Office and have a few minutes of relaxation when the world's issues weren't always on their shoulder.
What happens when the family is out of the White House, on travel, etc., on vacation? Is that a relief to the staff?
No. That's when we get stuff done. All the maintenance that has to be done. We do it while they're not there. We try and make sure that the house is in good order, but there are certain things that can't be done in a few hours, and it take weeks or days. The exterior restoration project of the stone took over 4 years, and the coordination on that was pretty tough with the families and the activities that were going on. So it's important to be able to get work done and not disrupt the family's activities. And so when they were gone, we were busy.
Gary Walters, you started in 1970 at the White House. President Nixon was in office. What was your job?
I started off as a uniform officer of the Secret Service. In the late 60s, there was world tumultuous circumstances that were going on around the world. And the decision was made to have a police entity that would do some security for the embassies in the Washington area and diplomatic missions in the Washington area. And they looked to the White House police, the White House police force, because they had some expertise in protecting a building and the people that were inside that building and an area, the grounds of the White House. So they wanted to expand that and put it under the auspices of the Secret Service. And they started an organization called the Executive Protective Service under the umbrella of the Secret Service. And they took the old White House police and multiplied it about 6 times and started the Executive Protective Service. I had just gotten out of the military, found out through the VA about this expansion of the police force. I was looking for a job that I could do and finish my college degree at night. And so I thought it'd be a good opportunity. And I grew up in the Washington area and knew about the White House, but never thought I'd be inside the gates. But this was an opportunity that I saw. I took it, and I did rather well. I was of our class, I was the valedictorian of the class. And unfortunately, on graduation day, just the week before, I had broken my leg playing a touch football game with the instructors of the police school. And so there I am in the photograph of the whole class, and everybody's in uniform except me. I've got on a suit and a cast. So anyway, I started off, and because of that, they couldn't put me out on post at the White House. It wouldn't look too secure to have somebody in a cast out on the post. So they placed me in the control center of the White House. Those are the people who monitor all the alarms and the cameras, the people that are coming in each day, both appointments and workers. So all those kind of activities. And I was put in that office until my leg healed. Well, I was there for almost 5 years, so I must have done something right because I stayed there long after my leg healed. And I got to know the White House and its environs, and also the usher's office and the people in the usher's office, and knew about their activities with the First Family. And that's what intrigued me when one of the assistant ushers called and said one of his colleagues was retiring and would I be interested in applying for the position in the Usher's office.
Did you have interaction with the Nixon family as a police officer at all?
As a police officer, it was somewhat truncated because it was towards the end of the Nixon administration. One incident that I related in the book was I was at the post by the elevator in the ground floor, and David Eisenhower was coming for dinner one evening, and President Nixon was very meticulous about the fact that people that were going to eat dinner were there at a specific time. And he was supposed to arrive at a specific time to go upstairs, and I got a call, and then a trip downstairs by Julie, and she said, "Have you heard from the gate? Is David on his way?" And I said, "No, but I'll call." I called the gate and they said, "No, we haven't seen him, but we'll call you right away." I said, "Well, make sure he gets cleared in as rapidly as possible." And I told her that. She went back upstairs. A few minutes later, I got a call from the gate. About the same time, I heard the doors at the south portico open and slam shut. And they said, "David's on his way in and he's in a hurry." Well, he came running through the diplomatic reception room and literally lost his balance and banged into the wall on the far side of the hall, came running up to me and said, "Am I late?" I said, "Well, Julie was just down a little while ago asking about you." And he said, "Uh-oh, I could be in trouble." And he pushed the button for the elevator, and I said, "Maybe you should run up the stairs." So he did, ran up the stairs. And later that night when he left, he said, "Thank you, you saved me."
Gary Walters, people like David Eisenhower or Barbara Bush's friend, Mrs. Potter Stewart,
Yes.
Do they have roam of the White House?
Yes.
If the first family says Gary Walters can go anywhere he wants at any time he wants, everybody stands down?
One rule that we had at the White House: the White House is the president's house. It's their home. And those people that are their guests or their family members, and they do have access to all those areas. Now, most of them are very meticulous about not going to the West Wing and barging into the Oval Office or some of the other areas. But as far as the residence itself, yeah, they come in, and they have also, at the request of the President and First Lady, certain people have access. When they show up at the gate, they're allowed to come in whether they've been pre-announced or not. And that was the case with Mrs. Potter Stewart, a tremendous friend of Mrs. Barbara Bush. And she would come in, and we'd greet her and take her upstairs, and she'd get off the elevator and she'd yell out, "Yoo-hoo!" And from someplace up in the second floor somewhere, you'd hear the same response. And that was where she'd find Mrs. Bush. That's how they were great friends.
We're sitting here again in the replica of the Oval Office, and over your shoulder is a hidden door. Where does that go?
There's a bathroom, private bathroom for the president down that little hall. There's also a small office.
Through that white door there?
Through that door over there, yeah.
Okay.
This one that's over my shoulder actually opens up into the hallway where the policeman sits, and then across to the Roosevelt room. So that's the closer door. It's that door over there that goes to that little hall, and that's where the president's bathroom is. And on the other side is where the little study is, or the office.
Is it room 500 that's back there?
No, actually, room 300.
Room 300.
President Herbert Walker Bush was a gentleman, and when he needed to go to the bathroom, he told his secretary, "I'm going to room 300. And I heard that a couple of different times, and I had our carpenters go out to local hardware store and pick up some brass 300 that I took and put on the door 300. And the next day, when the president went to the office in midday, he called and he said, "That is something that I laughed at for a considerable amount of time." He enjoyed it. And I left it there through succeeding presidents. And on the day, I had the honor of being in the Oval Office on the first day when George W. Bush, his son, took office. And his father was there. And He opened that door and he looked in there and he looked up and saw that 300 and he just broke out laughing. He said, "I can't believe that's still here." And I said, "Yes, sir. As far as I was concerned, that was a part of history," and it just stayed there.
August 8th, August 9th, 1974, were you on duty in the White House when President Nixon resigned and Gerald Ford became president?
I was in the control center. I was still a police officer, which is in the basement of the old executive office building of the Eisenhower building. And that's where all the alarms and everything are. And that was a very tense time around the White House. Demonstrators out on Pennsylvania Avenue, a lot of odd things that were going on around the White House, and obviously conjecture as to what the president was going to do. The president used the office that he had in the old executive office building, up those stairs that come up from West Executive Avenue. There, you go in those doors, the first set of doors there, and on the left was President Nixon's office. And we got word, as I said, I was in the control center. We got word from the president's staff that the president was going to be leaving his working office and going back to the residence, and he didn't want to see anybody. What does that mean? Doesn't want to see anybody. Well, we talked a little bit more, and we actually had the police officer that was standing out on the porch where the stairs come up be like a squirrel on a tree hiding from you as you walk past. Had the police officer move around because the president didn't want to see anybody. And we had a little bit of a difficult time in the press room because the president was going to go down the steps, go up the steps in front of the West Wing, and then down the tradesman's entrance and go into the residence. And that was right across in front of the press room. We made a decision to call the police officer that was in that room, and when we got word that the president was going to leave the office and go back to the residence, we asked the officer to lock the door, put down the shades to the press briefing room, and almost immediately I received many calls from the fire department, from the news directors wanting to know why the press were being confined in a very unsafe circumstance in the West Wing. By the time I received those dozen or so calls and tried to answer them the best I could, the president came out, went to the residence, we opened the door, put the shades up, and that's a footnote to history.
What was it like to have the Fords move in?
Once again, when when they moved in, I was still a police officer. But President and Mrs. Ford were very approachable people. They were wonderful to deal with. Of course, when they moved in, they had two children, older in age, moved into the White House also with them. And Susan occupied rooms just inside on the second floor above the north portico. And Jack Ford was resident on the third floor in a room up there. So they were wonderful people to be around.
And that's when you made the transition to the Usher's office.
I made the
during
transitions
that administration.
after that, yeah.
You cite 2 times that you saw Betty Ford angry. Oh, by the way, before you answer that question,
yeah,
was your book vetted because of what you're writing about?
No, because I'm not telling anything that's of a security circumstance or this extreme privacy. The president and first ladies had talked about these things to their friends. So I didn't feel uncomfortable talking about them. And there are many things that I could have put in the book, but they'll go with me to my grave. Mrs. Reagan taught me a very important lesson: just say no. So I use that to, when I come up against a question I don't want to answer, I just say no. But
two times,
Mrs.
Ford angry.
Yeah, Mrs. Ford, she went on a trip, and during that time, there was the curator of the White House was Mr. Clem Conger, who also was responsible for the diplomatic reception rooms at the State Department. And he and cohorts that were involved in the redecoration of the White House, they decided that the public spaces on the ground floor and the first floor of the residence should be extended to the second floor, to the 2 principal bedrooms that are on the second floor, the Queen's bedroom and the Lincoln bedroom, because of their historic background.
And they were going to allow visitors to come through
No,
those?
they weren't going to allow visitors. They were just going to redecorate them in a more traditional manner. And Mr. Conger went about doing that, and while Mrs. Ford was traveling, he changed the room completely. New bedspreads, new drapes, a new carpet, moved some pieces of furniture, put some other pieces of furniture in.
Without consultation?
Without consultation with the chief usher, Rex Skelton at the time, or Mrs. Ford. And he did it, and he was quite proud of himself and what they had accomplished. He called Mrs. Ford and said he had something he wanted to show her. Could he come up and meet with her when the day after she returned? And he escorted her down along with Mr. Skelton to the bedroom on the second floor, Lincoln bedroom. And I received a call shortly thereafter. I was sitting in the usher's office as an assistant usher, and Rex Skelton was on the phone, and he said, "Gary, do you know where the keys to the Lincoln bedroom are?" I said, "Yes, they're in our safe." He said, "Get them and come up and lock the doors to the Lincoln bedroom. Nobody's to go in until I say so." As I got the keys and went upstairs and went to walk down the hall, Mrs. Ford was walking back, and her face was bright red. She was furious. That
she didn't care for the decoration.
She didn't care for the fact that it had been done without discussing it with her. And the next day, the staff replaced everything that was in there previously, and that question went away and never was addressed again until Laura Bush did it, redecorated, with the help of the Committee for the Preservation of the White House and the White House Historical Association. That was once. Another one was when they were campaigning for election of their own as president. There was a trip scheduled, a campaign trip with their family. They were going to go on, I believe it was a river cruise down the Mississippi with various stops along the way. And the whole family was going to be there. And Jack was notorious for sleeping late, and I was asked by the family to make sure that Jack had wake-up calls along the way. They also talked to the White House operator. And the morning of that event, when they were getting ready to leave, I received a call directly from Mrs. Ford, and she said, "Gary, would you go up and make sure that Jack is up? I know he had calls put to him earlier." And so I did that twice. And both times I was told, "Yeah, I'm getting ready. I'll be ready by the time I'm supposed to be ready."
That's kind of a tricky role, isn't it? Waking up the president's son?
No, not when the president and the first lady said get him up. That was an easy decision for me. But so I went up a third time. And as I opened the elevator door, Mrs. Ford was standing there. Once again, her face was very red. And she said, "Jack won't be traveling with us." And she got on the elevator, and I took her downstairs. Obviously, he had neglected to be ready. And she was very upset about that. But that time passes, and they went on the trip and had a good time, I understand.
Gary Walters, throughout your 21 years as chief usher of the White House, there were multiple state dinners. Queen Elizabeth came over a couple of times. Princess Di and Prince Charles at the time were here. And every president had state dinners. What's the process for the chief usher during an event like that?
Well, it starts from the day that the president, through the State Department, invites a head of state, a head of government, to come to Washington. As soon as that invitation is accepted, we're notified by the State Department and or the West Wing, and we start planning. And it's usually at least a month or so away, but sometimes even further, depending on the who's coming to visit. And so I get the information, and I start dispensing that information to our staff. The pastry chef, the executive chef, the florist, start making those kind of preparations and getting them. Chefs are putting together a menu or a choice of menus. Florist is doing the same thing. And that's presented to the social secretary, who confers with the first lady. They come up with a menu that's approved, and the flowers that are going to be, and the array and table arrangements. And the chefs work with that. Roland Mesnier, who started in the Carter administration and worked for all those years as a pastry chef at the White House, a magnificent technician. He would actually call the embassy of whoever was coming to visit and find out if they had a preference in sweets or fruits or things that they might enjoy. And so he started the ball rolling as thinking about what he was going to do. We always tried to not do food of that country. We wanted to do American food. It had a Parisian, if you will, flair to it, because most of the cuisine at that time was done with the French background that most of the chefs had, the major chefs in the country. And so that started the ball rolling. And then we'd get in, once that was approved, we'd get into deciding how many people were going to be invited and what the entertainment was going to be. The social office was responsible for all that. And we just had a process at that point that we went through of getting ready for the event. There were times when we had larger events, not in the house, but in tents. In the Ford administration, bicentennial year, we put a tent up over the West Garden for the entire summer, spring and summer. And we were doing 2 state dinners a month, and sometimes more, in that tent. The Queen was there, obviously, like you said. And so it was a pretty intense time. And those kinds of events are completely the responsibility of the social secretary and the chief usher to make sure that they go on time and things are handled properly, that the president and the first lady can turn them over to us to let us do our planning and our characterization of what those events are going to be.
So Gary Walters, currently one of the bigger renovations of the White House grounds is happening with the addition of the ballroom, the taking down of the East Wing. Will that alleviate the need for these tents? And do you have a personal opinion about putting up a ballroom?
Every president that I had the pleasure to serve and the honor, they all lamented about not having a larger venue. State dining room, 130 people for state dinners. If we did one in the East Room, we might get 200 people in there. But that took away the largest room in the White House, where you usually had entertainment after dinner. So they all lamented the fact that there wasn't a larger venue. When they go overseas, they go into these large ballrooms, facilities, part of castles, and they have wonderful experiences. And I think they all lamented about the smallness, and it's because the president's home. It's only served, as I told most social secretaries, I said, there's no such thing as a room stretcher. I mean, you can't, it's like your shoes. You can't stretch make them a half size bigger. So we were constantly putting up tents, even back to the Nixon administration when the POWs were returned. We did 1,800 people in a tent in the South Grounds. So there was a constancy of that. Many people have asked me about the ballroom. Is it needed? Every president said they wanted something larger, so I think it's going to be a wonderful addition. I have a little bit of nostalgia about the East Wing because my wife and I met there. So I have a good memory of the East Wing. No matter whether it's there or not, I have a good memory.
You write in your book, White House Memories, that you actually, even after your retirement, you consulted with President and Mrs. Trump prior to their coming to office in the first term.
I received a call from a gentleman who I knew from a previous administration who was part of the transition team. And in December, when I received the call, he asked me...
December 2016.
December, yes, after the election, but before the inaugural. And it was in December, so it was a full month after and he asked me if I'd be willing to talk to the transition team. And I said, yes. I talk to the press still. I'd be glad to answer questions. But you have to remember, I don't have any authority. All I can do is provide information. So I met with the transition team and eventually was invited to New York to talk to the president-elect about his move into the White House. And in fact, when I walked into the office, first thing he said to me after a brief introduction was, "Are you here for a job?" And I said, "No, Mr. President-elect. Actually, my first grandchild's being born on January the 19th, and I'm going to be in Texas, in Dallas, where that child's coming into this world. So no, I'm not looking for a job." He laughed heartily, and we discussed he said to me after that, he sat down in his chair and he looked and he said, "What's the first thing I should think about?" And I said, "Decorating the Oval Office." He said, "What?" I said, "Yeah, you have a responsibility. You don't know what's going to happen on inaugural day." Jimmy Carter spent his last hours of the presidency in the Oval Office. And soon after the inaugural, President Ronald Reagan came and spoke to the American people about the hostages being released in his Oval Office. The Oval Office had been changed from the office of the previous president to President Reagan's office. "You mean you have all that furniture?" And he called his daughter and said, "Honey, come in here. We don't have to buy any furniture for the Oval Office. They got all this." And luckily, I had brought with me the books that were published by the White House Historical Association, and the art, the decorations, the furnishings. And I had all those books with me, and I presented them to him. And we literally sat in his office and decorated his office, carpet, things that we had in storage that we could put in that day. So that's how I got involved early on.
And went to meet Mrs. Trump.
And then I went after that and met with her and her staff. And my first introduction to her interest, obviously, in her son. We were standing there talking about moving into the White House. And at some point, a bell rang, and one of her aides came into the room and said, "Barron's home from school." She excused herself and went off to see to his tidings for the day. So I spent time with the staff there, and once again had the books that were provided by the Historical Association, and made arrangements to talk with them about what rooms could be changed over for inaugural night so that they could have all of their family there and the people that they wish to have. So had a little bit of an opportunity to deal with the president-elect and Mrs. Trump in that circumstance.
Gary Walters, quote, "How about you, Pops?" What is that?
It was a way that I could tell people how the family got the feelings that they had for the residence staff. We had one particular butler, George Haney, who was a little bit of a cut-up. Always the character.
Long term?
Long term, had been there for he'd worked there for his entire career. And he was serving Mrs. Barbara Bush in the map room of the White House. She was actually having tea with a number of press people in that room, and they were talking about her initiative for the child reading and so forth. And as they were passing things around, tea and pastries, I think they had, George was there, and he was the one that was in charge of that circumstance. And one of the people asked Mrs. Bush, "How have you interacted well with this staff? You seem to be quite friendly with this gentleman." And Mrs. Bush said, "Yes, we're very comfortable with the resident staff." And the press person said, well, what do you feel about them?" And Mrs. Bush looked up at George, and George said, "Presidents come and go, butlers stay." He's the same butler that, to bring up your point, he was upstairs one night late in the administration, and the president and Mrs. Bush liked to have a cocktail before dinner. And the president and first lady chose different things, different nights, and the butlers always prided themselves in trying to have available immediately what they wanted. So they were sitting in the West Hall. George came out and asked the first lady what she was interested in having. And the president didn't say much of anything, and he started to walk towards the pantry to get the first lady's drink. And he turned around and he said, "What about you, Pops?" And Mrs. Bush broke up laughing, and she said, "How? George, you need to be fired. I'm going to talk to Gary in the morning about this." And the president by that time was just laughing, because that's what the family called him, Pops. All the children called him Pops. And George was embarrassed. He said, "Mr. President, I'm sorry, it just slipped out." And by that time, the president was just laughing. And he said, "George, you're okay. You won't have to be fired tonight."
We have barely scratched the surface of the stories that Gary Walters tells in his book, White House Memories, 1970 to 2007, Reflections of the Longest-Serving Chief Usher. Mr. Walters and the White House Historical Association, thank you for your time.
Thank you for the opportunity to address the president's house as a home.
And next week on the Q&A podcast, our guest is University of Texas professor Peniel Joseph, and we talk about his book on 1963, which was a pivotal year in American civil rights history and included the assassinations of Medgar Evers and JFK, the Birmingham church bombing, and the March on Washington.